It's good to see everybody this morning. I hope you are all doing well. I want to welcome you to our Bible class here at the Concord Street Church of Christ. We have some visitors with us. We're very thankful that you all are here too. If you wouldn't mind, take a moment and fill out a visitor card. There is a QR code in the back of the pew in front of you, or you can scan that QR code up on the screen, or there's a gold card there in front of you that you can take and fill out also. We had several over at our house last night for a little get-together with the Midlife Christers class, and they decided to stay. And no, it wasn't forever, but we had a great time. I tried to remind them. I said, y'all got to leave, only work one day a week, and it's tomorrow. I got to get to bed, but anyway, it was good to hang out with several folks, and it is good to be together with all of you this morning. I'll remind you that we have our combined service this morning at 10, and so make sure, Lord willing, we'll have some extra people here in the auditorium than we usually do, so make sure you make room for everyone, and we are looking forward to that service this morning, and that will be just wonderful. So we are wrapping up in this class, at least, the idea of cultivating the life with Jesus, and some of the things that we have talked about throughout this quarter, through the many weeks that we've gone through, is we started way back, I can't remember, I guess in January, the first Sunday in January, talking about the difference between being spiritual and being religious, and talk about how that we need to live spiritual lives. Talk about prayer. We talked about living in Scripture like Jesus did. We talked about being sheep as Jesus is our shepherd. We talked about the fruit of the Spirit, being love and all the different aspects of it. Worship, spiritual disciplines, and mentoring. And then the last couple weeks, we've talked about dying to sin and what that looks like. This morning we have our last lesson as far as this teaching block, if you will, is concerned. Next week there will be a substitute in here. Dale, are you, or Dale's not in here. Is that a yes? Are you teaching? Okay. Dale will be teaching next week. I will be in Dunlap, Tennessee, holding a gospel meeting up there at that congregation. So I will be up there for Sunday. It's a Sunday through Thursday gospel meeting. So if any of y'all are in the Dunlap area, feel free to come by and see us. And so I will not be here, but then the following Sunday, so let's see, what's that, like April the 13th, something along those lines, we'll start a new series of classes in the auditorium talking about the church shaped by the New Testament. Okay, and so we'll look at the New Testament, and we'll look at the church there. So we've kind of done Christian living as far as individuality, and then the next quarter we'll look at Christianity as far as a corporate nature, as far as the church is concerned. Okay, so that is the goal coming up next. Let's start this morning by looking at a passage over in Matthew and in chapter 11. Matthew in chapter 11. It's up on the screen for you also. But if you want to look at it in your own Bibles, I always recommend that. Matthew chapter 11, and we'll start in verse 1. And I know it said, and we'll go through verse 10 here. It says, "Now it came to pass when Jesus finished commanding his 12 disciples that he departed from there to teach and to preach in their cities. And when John," so this is John the Baptist, "had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, 'Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?' Jesus answered and said to them, 'Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me.' And as they departed, Jesus began to say to the multitudes concerning John, 'What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings and in houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet. Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before me. Right. This morning, in using that kind of as a jump-off passage, we'll look at John the Baptist and some of the things of his and more in a moment. We're going to talk about managing our expectations when it comes to our Christian life, okay? And here's a quote for you to start off with. This is attributed to Shakespeare, although no one can ever find where he actually said this. But it goes like this: expectation is the root of all heartache. Expectation is the root of all heartache. What do you think about that quote? Agree, disagree? What do you think whoever said this is trying to get across? How is expectation the root of all heartache? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. If you think something is going to be something, and then that something is not that something, then you're upset that that something is not the something that you thought that something was going to be, right? That's the other quote that Shakespeare had, but it was too wordy. So I didn't want to use that one. But definitely, here's how another way that I put it. Unrealized expectations lead to resentments, and resentments kill, okay? Think about it like this. If you have an expectation of a relationship, and that relationship does not meet that expectation, then you get very resentful towards that relationship. And eventually, in your resentment towards that relationship, it's going to kill that relationship. And whether that's be a relationship with people or, relationship with places, right? If you have an expectation when you go to a restaurant that it's going to be a certain way, that they're going to treat you a certain way, that the food's going to taste a certain way, and none of that stuff happens, then what do you think about that restaurant from here on out? I'm not going to go there, right? I'm not giving them my money. But if you go to a place and you have no expectations of it, and it's mediocre, you might actually like it more than going to a place and expecting something, right? My family, many, many years ago, should have bought stock in Chick-fil-A because we have single-handedly caused their success throughout all the South, okay? But we love Chick-fil-A. And one of the things that I always find, shocking, and this is very rarely happens, but when you go to a Chick-fil-A and someone is not nice, you're like, whoa, you must be working at the wrong place. The expectation is such that everything that happens, even if there's a problem, they're like, well, that's my pleasure, right? I'm going to try to help out with that type of thing. You have those expectations that are there. Well, when thinking about that, let's answer this question. What are some common expectations that people have about becoming a Christian? Yes, ma'am.
Some people see it as now my problems are over.
Okay. Now my problems are over. What are some other expectations? Yes, ma'am. Okay, that their life is boring. Okay, that maybe if looking out, other people are looking at Christians and thinking that their life is going to be boring. But let's think about also in the lines of you become a Christian, what is the expectations of your life after one becomes a Christian? All right, that you have to be perfect, that you're going to be sinless, or maybe even that sin is not going to bother you as much anymore, or temptation is not going to bother you. What are some other expectations? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I used to struggle with my job. I used to struggle making ends meet. But now I'm a Christian. God loves me because I'm doing what is right. And so therefore, I'm going to be blessed, and I'm not going to have to worry about all of those things anymore. No one's, you know what? No one's going to hurt me. And in fact, no one's going to hurt me, but especially no one where? In the church. Because we're all family, right? And we're all Christians. And you know what Christians always do? They always act like Christ. Every single one does, right? That's kind of that expectation. These are good. I wrote some down, and I can't remember if I put them one by one, or yeah, I did. Here's some ones that I had. Okay, expectations of becoming a Christian. Suddenly, everything is rainbows and daisies. All right, you walk around, and you used to walk around, and there'd be a storm cloud sometimes. But now, when you walk outside, it's like the sun is shining, right? Where that was that storm cloud, now there's a rainbow. You know, everything is popping up daisies, if you will. When you become a Christian, there's the expectation that it's going to be the end of the storybook, and they all lived happily ever after, right? Whatever problem we were having, now we have Christ, and, you know, Christ is the solution to all the problems, which he is, but we have the expectation that everything is just going to be wonderful. As was mentioned, all my problems will stop. Whatever problem I had, and the reason why, and this is probably sometimes what happens to people, and which is fine, but we need to be honest with it, is sometimes people decide to turn to Christ when they've tried everything else, right? In addiction and recovery type circles, what people talk about is hitting rock bottom. And one of the things that you try to do with people is you try to raise their bottom, meaning you don't want them to hit way down there. You want them to hit bottom somewhere like up here, because then it's not going to be as bad, and you'll be able to help somebody recover a little more quickly. But sometimes people think, well, now I've got all these problems. Well, you know what I need to do? I need to turn to the Lord. And with the false hope or the false thought that if I turn to the Lord, then suddenly all those problems that I had are just going to go away. My desire to sin is going to stop, right? This will be the solution. I've tried to stop sinning. I've tried to stop this behavior, whatever this behavior is that's causing all these problems in my life. And so now I'm going to turn to the Lord, and I'm going to give myself to Christ, and now those things will never bother me again. That's an expectation, at least. My marriage, my family, my other relationships will somehow be perfect. I think this is an expectation sometimes that maybe we have upon ourselves, and this is an unrealistic expectation perhaps we put upon other people too, right? Just to think that just because there is a Christian family means that there's not going to be marriage problems, or just because it's a Christian family means that their kids are going to behave the way that their kids should behave. You know, my kids have been raised in a Christian family for their entire life, and they have never behaved the way they're supposed to behave, right? So that may be an over-exaggeration, but you get the idea. We think that, well, my marriage is struggling, so what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to become a Christian. And then the marriage just suddenly stops struggling, right? Not necessarily. It can make changes, but it's not. This is maybe some faulty expectations. Everyone at church is going to treat me right. That's an expectation. And then sometimes that expectation is not met. We'll talk about that in a second. As was mentioned a moment ago, no more financial problems, right? And I think that some of this to blame is like, you know, your TV evangelism, right? Saying that if you just do this and you do that, that suddenly you place your seed offering and send us some money, and then you go out to your mailbox and there'll be a check that shows up, and you'll never have to worry about all of these things again. No more financial problems. I will always feel fulfilled and content, right? We can look at passages like over in Philippians and in chapter 4 about how where Paul says, you know, I know how to abound, I know how to be abased, I know how to live with things, I know how to live and want, but in everything I know how to be content, for I can endure, or I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And definitely Paul says that, and definitely that can be true, that's not the way it always feels, right? There's many times that we feel unfulfilled in our Christianity, or perhaps that I never will have to worry again because you have Christ. And so why should you worry? And again, maybe that is what the ideal is supposed to be, but these expectations. So let's think about this now. What could these unrealized or unrealized expectations lead to? All right, separation. In what way, John? Okay, you can give up on your faith. What? Disappointment. Definitely. Discontent. So what? Overthinking things. Maybe I'm not doing something right. Maybe the Christianity just didn't stick, right? Maybe Christ's blood. I know I was baptized in the Christ's blood, but maybe it wore off, right? We had something else. Somebody said really something good. All right, disillusioned. Okay, disappointment, discontentment, disillusioned. Definitely. Gosh. Giving up. This is not working as the way I thought, right? And I think sometimes we unfortunately can treat Christianity like we treat a diet program, right? It's got great reviews, right? And we start on it really, really good. And then life happens and we think, maybe that's not working out the way it's supposed to work out. And so we're just going to stop it altogether, not realizing that it's one of those things that obviously the more I put into it, the more I'll be able to get out of it. But also at the same time, you can always be doing the right thing and still things will not turn out the way that you thought they were going to turn out, right? And I think that's the problem with a lot of these expectations is we are expecting things to go what way? The way we think they should go, right? And when they don't go the way that we think, and what makes an expectation is because we are expecting something, right? And when it doesn't go that way, we think, well, that wasn't what I expected. And so now we're upset about it. We're in the church, and for no fault of your own as a Christian, someone in the church does something that's mean, that's wrong, that's even sinful. And because you were not expecting that would happen with somebody, maybe it's even somebody in leadership, maybe it's even the preacher that does something that hurts you in some way. And if you're expecting this individual to always be the one that is going to be on the right side of things, that's always going to be living like Christ, and they're not, and you have some type of expectation of that person, and they don't fulfill that expectation, then now you might just even leave the church over it, right? Leave Christianity over some of these things because of these unrealized expectations, okay? Now, I'm not trying to say that Christianity is not all that it's cracked up to be. In fact, we talked about, John 10:10, our verse for this year, abundance, right? I've come to give you life and to give you it more abundantly. And that is definitely still true. But we need to change the lens that we look at as far as what is abundance. Abundance does not look like a bunch of, zeros in a bank account, right? After another number, not just zero, right? But you have to have a number first and then a bunch of zeros, right? That's not what necessarily abundance looks like as far as Christianity. Abundance in Christianity also does not look like that you are always happy about all things, okay? Should you have a different outlook of things? Well, definitely so. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be loss. Doesn't mean there's not going to be hurt. Doesn't mean that you're not ever going to get sick again. It doesn't mean that you're not going to pray about something fervently every single night, maybe even to the point of tears, and it's still not going to go the way that you thought it should go. There was it was a few years back, I can't remember when, but there was a a religious group of people, and there was this little girl that was a part of their group, and she had gotten sick, and she was basically not long for this world because of whatever disease it was, maybe in cancer or something along those lines. And one of the leaders of that religious group got up and said, well, we're going to pray. And we know that if we pray, that this girl will be healed. It's going to happen. All we have to do is believe, and we're going to pray, and we're going to pray, and we're going to pray, and then this girl will be healed. She will be healed because we will pray to God, and God will make sure that she is healed. What do you think happened to the little girl? She died. Now, does that mean that God suddenly isn't real? In some people's mind, it does. Because they put an expectation upon God that is not expectation that he said that you should ever put upon him, right? And the same thing can happen even in our own lives with these things. Other questions or comments before we look at some more passages about expectations? Yes, Denzel. Yeah. Right. So, staying in the Word, thinking about the rich young ruler who has, he has this expectation of that all this stuff is going to be the thing that saves him. And obviously, that is not the case. You have the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and in that occasion, actually, Jesus is showing that it's the great reversal of things, right? Just because we have success on earth does not mean we'll have success in eternity. And just because we have nothing on earth does not mean we'll not have anything in eternity. And that we have that great switch there. And so help to manage those expectations for sure. Yes, Terry. I thought you had raised your hand also. Okay. Yes.
I was when you brought up about being hurt in the church, because so often we do think that because we're in the body, that somehow everything is going to be fine, people in the body are going to be right. But when I think about Matthew 18,
Yeah.
in verse 7, woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come.
Yeah.
And so we letting us know it's not if, it's when you are offended.
Right.
How are you prepared to deal with the offense? Or how do you deal with the offense?
How are you going to deal with it when there is hurt, right? If you're going to have a relationship, any relationship that's worth having as a relationship is a relationship that's going to have challenges in it, right? If there's all the other people you don't have challenges with as far as relationships, those are called strangers. Because you don't care, right? I mean, what's it to you? But if it's an actual relationship where you actually love the other person, that person loves you, there's going to come times that there's hurt things that happen. Sometimes maybe it's even purposeful, right? Sometimes we do things, and I've heard people say before, well, I just said that because I knew it would hurt them. Well, why'd you do that? Well, because I was hurt. And I didn't want me to be the only person that was hurt at that time. I wanted someone else to feel it too. And when we step back from it and think, oh, that's mean, that's wrong. But then when you're in it, you're like, oh, I do that, right? Definitely, those things are going to happen. We must realize that that's going to happen. And, same line with Christianity. We think about marriages, right? And sometimes when I've done premarital counseling for couples before I do their ceremony and things. And it's young love is amazing, right? Oh, young love. Another name for that is stupid love, right? Because there's this expectation that, oh, man, we're in love and everything's going to be great, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and I just love him and he just loves, all of this type of stuff. And then life happens, right? And then we got to decide, now what are we going to do, right? And that's the same type of thing when it comes to Christianity. Just because someone has become a Christian does not mean that life has suddenly stopped to happen, right? And does not mean that there's not bad things that are going to happen. Sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it's somebody else's fault. Sometimes it's no one's fault at all. It's just a fallen world that we live in, right? And in definitely managing these expectations. I saw another hand, Miss Marion.
Just a comment about expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ramifications of emotional and mental impact on your
Yeah,
You drag it down the road so far until you can't find your way out.
definitely so.
It does impact us on our
Yeah. It impacts you on your emotions, it impacts you on your mental health as far as, that's the resentments, right? If you are in a house, okay, so let's just use marriage again, okay? And let's just say a husband and a wife. And a wife is expecting the husband to do a certain thing as far as around the house, or maybe he even said it, that he was going to do the dishes. Let's do something simple, okay? He said that he was going to do the dishes. But as husbands, he forgot about that he said that. But then the wife, the entire day is expecting what? Him to do the dishes. And so as she walks by the sink, each time she goes, right? And she goes to do something else. She walks, and then it's just continuing to build up, until finally something else that is said, and then she just completely like, well, you never do anything around here. What do you mean? Oh, what? Right? And it's because there's this expectation, and this expectation is not being met, and then there's the resentments, and the resentments keep there from being communication, and then when there's no communication, then there's even more problems as far as that goes, okay? This is not a class about marriage, but that's the most real thing that most of us deal with as far as those expectations and resentments. Yes, tell me about how you're resenting your husband.
Absolutely not.
Oh.
No, I wanted to just put a layer on that, not just the expectation that will get done, but it'll get done on my time.
Right, yes. When I want it to. Yeah.
I was talking about the spiritual sense.
Thank you.
He had to bring it in.
Let's y'all keep the Jacobs in your prayers. Especially Michael Sr., okay? My dad told a story about when we were little. This is when, I guess, I was a toddler, and then my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, she must have been even younger because she was in a walker, like the little baby walker. People don't use that anymore. But you remember those things, right? Like you would sit in it, had the wheels on the bottom, and kids would fly around in them and all that stuff. And I think the job that my dad was supposed to do, because my mom had something she had to do with her job or something, and so dad was at home, and he was supposed to be watching us. But part of watching us is he's also supposed to clean something in the house or something along those lines. And obviously, long before cell phones, long before if you didn't get in touch with somebody, you just couldn't get in touch with them, right? And he failed to do all of those things because my baby sister, with her walker, was able to push through the screen door and go tumbling down the concrete steps in the walker and, bust her head open and all that kind of stuff. And mom had no idea about it because it's not like you can call somebody and let them know or send them a text, hey, by the way, I'm not gonna be able to clean the house because your daughter's bleeding from her head, right? It's just what happened. And the story goes, obviously I don't remember any of it, the story goes that mom at first was very, very upset because of the unrealized expectations, but then realized, well, the expectations now have changed because the situation has changed, right? And the same thing happens with our marriages and relationships with individuals. Same thing happens with the church too. If everything goes perfectly, then we can expect everything to end up perfect. But the problem is, as long as we live here on earth, things are not going to go perfectly. And so we should not expect it to be that either. Let's look at a couple other passages real quick. Look over in John chapter 6. We'll spend just some time in John. And notice that the idea of these expectations of Christianity also kind of go back to what people had as expectations of Christ, right? They had these unrealized, these unrealistic in some ways, expectations upon who Jesus was supposed to be. I guess a couple of years ago now, we did a whole series of lessons on the Christ, on the Messiah. But notice some of these things. John 6 and in verse 14. Is that what I wanted? John 6. And it says, then those men, here we go. So verse 14, the men said, this is truly the prophet who is come into the world. Okay, the idea of the prophet meaning the Messiah, the prophet that Moses talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 18. He says, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. What were they expecting of Jesus? Him to be an earthly king. So much so that they were going to force him to be that king. He wasn't that king. So how did people feel about that? Were they happy about that? They resented him because of it, right? Let's jump on to chapter 7. John chapter 7, and starting in verse 25. Now some of them from Jerusalem said, is this not he whom they seek to kill? But look, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is truly the Christ? However, we know where this man is from, but when the Christ comes, no one knows where he is from. So they expected him to be like a heavenly figure, but he was there as a man. And what's ironic there is, where did he come from? He came from heaven, but they knew that he was from Nazareth, and they're like, oh, that can't work. But they had an expectation, and when that expectation is not met, it causes problems. Look at verse 31 in that same, this is King John. And many of the people believed in him and said, when the Christ comes, will he do more signs than this man has done? They were expecting maybe even more signs are supposed to be done. Oh, I know he's done these amazing signs, but has he really done enough? Can we truly say that he is the Messiah? Shouldn't these other things happen? Chapter 7, verse 40. Therefore, many from the crowd, when they heard this saying, they said, truly, this is the prophet. Others says, this is the Christ. But some said, will the Christ come out of Galilee? Has not Scripture said that the Christ comes from the seed of David and the town of Bethlehem, where David was? So they're thinking, well, how in the world could this be the Christ? Because the Christ is here in Galilee, and where is the Christ supposed to be born from? Bethlehem. Where was Christ born from? Bethlehem, but they didn't realize that. They had a different expectation of who that was going to be. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, verses 30 through 34. And Jesus answered and said, this voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of this world be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. And he said, he said, signifying by what death he would die. The people answered him, we have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Jesus says that I'm going to die, and what do the people expect of the Christ? He's not ever going to die. How are you going to have a kingdom that endures forever if the king dies? Now, they had an expectation that he would never die. Jesus knew when he said that he was going to die, but he'd be resurrected, right? So they have all these expectations. What do we learn from these expectations that these individuals had of the Christ that ended up being unrealized expectations, at least in their mind, right? And maybe that's even the answer to the question. They were expecting Jesus to do the things that they wanted Jesus to do, right? They expected Jesus to be heavenly, right? And the Christ to appear and to save them. They expected Jesus to be a king and to rule them. They expected Jesus to do even more signs. They expected Jesus to never die. Now, he did come from heaven. He did become a king. He has not ever died, if you will. He resurrected to live forever. But all of these things were not the way that they expected it to be done. And when it's not done by our expectation, that's when there's some of those resentments that come forth. Same thing with Christianity, right? We expect it to go a certain way. And when it does not go that certain way, it can lead to problems. Questions and comments about that before we look back at John the Baptist here in a moment. how many people, I'd say the majority of us here are Christians. I would say the majority of us have been Christians for at least a decade or so. How many people has Christianity gone exactly the way that you expected it to go? Okay, not from the beginning. Okay, definitely so. Charlie. Okay. Right. Definitely so. The more you lean on Christ, the better it will be. I would dare say the more we lean on Christ, the better outlook that we have about the things that are going on, right? I think sometimes we do perhaps ourselves a disservice, we do our church a disservice, and I don't notice it as much here, perhaps, as I have other places, but I think sometimes we definitely place too much of an emphasis on being perfect people instead of being people that are perfected in Christ. All right? Can we try to see the contrast there? Just because you never forget your coat when you come to, church does not mean that you have everything buttoned up, right? And just because you do does not mean that everything is going wrong, right? If, just because your marriage is actually a marriage where you have two people from two different backgrounds, from two different families that are trying to come together as one and to live this life in a world where everything is constantly trying to pull you apart, just because that relationship sometimes has problems doesn't mean that you aren't being Christian anymore, right? And we also sometimes try to make it look so good that when other people get into it, they think it's supposed to look like that, but what that actually is astroturf and never actually real at all, right? It looks perfect because it's fake, right? And in actuality, it's not. And so that's why it's important for us, especially people that are older and taking young Christians, is to help them along these things and let them know that there is going to be disappointments, right? And that just because you're a Christian does not mean you're never going to struggle with this sin or with that sin or with this temptation or with that temptation. Just because you're a Christian does not mean that everybody in the church is always going to be nice to you. And it does not mean that you're perhaps ever going to always be nice to other people, okay? You should, but that's not always what happens, okay? And manage these expectations, because if not, it's going to turn bad in some of these ways. All right, let's look at another passage. This is a passage we looked at the beginning, and I'm just going to read it, and then we'll talk about it some more. Okay, this is where we started off this morning. This is Matthew in chapter 11, just the first 3 verses this time. Now it came to pass when Jesus finished commanding his 12 disciples that he departed from there to teach and preach in their cities. And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?" How do you feel about John? How do you feel about this passage here? Yes, Denzel. He's being what? He's being doubtful. Yeah, right? Right? Right.
So he acknowledged constantly who Jesus was, but when he got in jail, he became doubtful.
Okay. So what was said there for those online and did not hear what Denzel said, John the Baptist has a consciousness, a realization of who Jesus is, even before he has consciousness, perhaps, right? When he's in the womb, when Mary and Elizabeth see each other and both pregnant, and the baby jumps in the womb and those type of things. But then even afterwards, when John is preaching and teaching, he's preaching about one that's going to come after him that he's preparing the way for. When that one comes to be baptized by him, he's like, no, you don't need to be baptized by me. I need to be baptized by you. Not worthy to loose your sandals. And then he even says to his own disciples, this is the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Does John know that Jesus is the Christ? Yeah. The voice came from heaven. Right. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Yeah, John was there. John saw the Spirit descend upon Jesus and stay there. That's the whole reason why he knows that he is the Messiah for sure, if you will. So the point I want you to see is that he knows that Jesus is the Messiah, but then what does he say here? Are you the Messiah? Are you the, like, I did all this prep work for you, but should I have been prepping for somebody else? Yes, Ron. Yeah, it could be. Did John have an idea that Jesus was going to be an earthly king and maybe not a spiritual king? I don't know. I think that might have something to do with it. Yes, Terry.
I took it as more him, and he said he must increase and I must decrease.
Yeah.
I took it him saying, I'm going to be to his followers, that this is the one you should be following.
Right.
And so he's kind of taking himself away, back, and now letting Christ take over and be
Okay.
the main.
Perhaps there's some of that. I see as was mentioned by Denzel, I see some doubt here in John's understanding of who Jesus is. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Since we are talking about expectations, it could be realizing that I really do not know absolutely everything, so let me go directly to the fact and ask
Okay.
doubts that I have.
So maybe I don't know everything, and so I do have some doubts, and so let me go to the source and try to figure out if this is actually what it is or not. I think all of that is good. Yes, Marion.
Also remember that he's in prison.
What?
He's in prison, and there's pressure. He's hearing some other things going on, and now he knows academically, and he believes.
Okay.
But he wants to show yourself to me.
All right. I think that's where I want to be, not in prison. That's where I want to think about as far as the thoughts go. I don't know, and I'm reading between the lines here. I'm not trying to place something upon John that he's not thinking. But something that I find interesting is that John does not ask this question until he's in prison. I would dare say that when you're in prison, I've never been in prison, but when you're in prison, maybe you have some more time to think. And maybe as you're sitting there thinking about, hey, I thought Jesus was the Messiah. If he's the Messiah, then why am I here in prison? I'm the guy that got everything ready for him. If anybody should not be in prison, it's not supposed to be me. Yes, ma'am.
So is he having, in these doubtful moments, is he having an unrealistic expectation of what Christ should be?
I think, and this is where I am taking this, okay? And like I said, John can talk to me later on and say, that's not the case at all, and that's fine. But where I'm taking that today is thinking about how that John perhaps had an expectation that his life would be different if Jesus was the Messiah. And is his life different because Jesus is the Messiah? Yes. But maybe it's not the rainbows and daisies like he thought it was going to be. Yes, Robert. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, I would say the moment before the execution, maybe he had that thought too. Like, is this really what this is supposed to be type thing? And like I said, I may be completely wrong. But how I want to apply that to us is I think a lot of times we know who Jesus is, and we believe that Jesus is who he says he is, but then we find ourselves in prison. and we start to doubt whether he still is who he says he is. As Marion said, that intellectually we know the thing, but experientially, that's not the word, but by what we are experiencing, it makes us think that maybe we don't know the thing. Yes, Rhonda. Terry, you got to take Rhonda back to your class. This has been too, no, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Rhonda.
As Jesus points out to him, though, because of his relationship with Jesus, verse 6 says, and blessed, when they told him, go tell John what you saw.
Right.
But then, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me.
Yep.
And so giving John some assurance or giving John an understanding of what he was going through was because of his relationship to Jesus.
Definitely so. Definitely so. And I that's where we want to try to get with this passage. And we also answer this a little bit about how do we feel about John's doubt? And I definitely think that it's realistic. Yes, Robin.
I also think maybe John was starting the transition with his disciples, and maybe his disciples need to be following Jesus.
Right.
He was starting the transition.
That's what Terry was saying, yeah.
That I want you to hear it from this man.
Right.
To your ears, and therefore, because he's in prison, he's done.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Maybe it's John the Baptist. That's the decreasing part, and that Jesus needs to increase. Like, y'all stop following after me. Like, why are y'all still hanging out with me while I'm in prison? Go follow the guy that's doing the things that he's supposed to be doing. And that may be the case also. What I want to receive from this, as far as thinking about expectations and thinking about doubt, is having doubt is not a bad thing necessarily. Okay. I think sometimes we give doubt a bad name, as if you ever doubt anything in your Christianity, then suddenly you are not the Christian that you're supposed to be, right? You don't need to have a doubt. You should not have any doubts when it comes to your Christianity whatsoever. But doubts, if we express those doubts, lead to better faith. It's the doubts that we have that we do not express, that we just let mill around in us and mill around us, that cause problems. This is not the exact quote, but this is Soren Kierkegaard, I believe, and this is kind of a summary of a quote that he has. Unexpressed doubt leads to unbelief, but expressed doubt leads to deeper faith. One thing that we see that John does here, at least, that he asks about it, right? He goes back to the source, if you will, and gets confirmation about that Jesus really is the Christ. When we have doubts about Christianity, when we are experiencing these different things, we also need to go back to the source, go back to the Bible, and have those doubts, if you will, have our faith reinforced by those doubts. One thing we should never do is, especially when it comes to young people, we should never tell young people not to question their faith. Because if we teach them not to tell them, no, if like they ask a question, no, don't, that's just the way it is. Don't question your faith. They'll eventually get to somebody that says, you need to question your faith and you don't need to believe any of those things that people said. Instead, we need to get people to actually live out their faith and to understand their faith, right? Where it goes beyond intellectual, but even when I'm going through the prison, I still know the thing because I have reinforced all of that stuff. Okay, we're running out of time, so I got 2 more slides. Give me your thoughts on these expectations. If I live right, everything will work out right. Can it be expected? Do we sometimes expect that? Sometimes we even have the phrase that good things happen to good people, right? And bad things only happen to bad people. Go read Job. That's what Job's friends thought. Oh, Job, you lost your house, you lost your stuff, you lost your family, you lost all these things. What did you do? You had to have done something, okay? Not necessarily the case. Once I become a Christian, my blank, you can fill in the blank, will become better. We talked about this earlier too. Whether it be my marriage, my parenting, my job, my finances, my health, all of those things. These are expectations that are faulty expectations. Let's close by looking at this passage. Look over in Hebrews and in chapter 6. And we'll close with this. So sometimes we can have some unrealized expectations. Let me tell you what you can expect, okay? This is what you can expect from Christianity. Hebrews in chapter 6, and starting in verse 11. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, okay? What the Hebrew writer here is wanting them to do is he wants them to keep on keeping on. Don't give up, don't give up, don't give up, don't turn back just because things are hard right now. Don't turn back just because there's Judaizers telling you to go back to Judaism. Don't do that. Verse 12, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those through faith and patience inherited the promises. Verse 13, for when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. Okay, Abraham had to patiently endure. You do not endure something that is just rainbows and daisies, right? That's not endurance. He was going through difficulty. He obtained the promise. For men indeed swear by the greater, an oath for confirmation is from them an end to a dispute. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, by two immutable things, that being the oath, and then the second thing, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope that is set before us. Okay? That's a big fancy way of saying that God made a promise. And the expectation you can have of that promise is what? He's going to keep it. If he makes a promise to you, he's going to keep it. Now, don't make promises for God that God didn't promise. Sometimes we make God say that I'm going to make everything perfect for you all the time. And God's like, I didn't say that, right? My kids all the time, they twist my words. You said that we could play, on the Nintendo or whatever. I said you might be able to play. But you heard that as that you get to play for until the end of time. That's not what I said, right? Don't make promises for God that he didn't make. But the promises that he does make, he is going to keep. Verse 19, and so the rest of verse 18, so that is something that we have fled for refuge, that we can actually hold on to. And even when other things, the storm is around us, we still have that refuge. In fact, he's going to refer to it in the next verse as that anchor, right? Even when everything else is going on around us, we still have that anchor. You see, earlier on in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 2, he uses another nautical term about drift away, right? Pay closer attention to the things that you have heard, lest you drift away from so great a salvation. Okay, that talks about somebody who has not secured their rope around the anchor. Their rope is loose, and so now when the waves and the storm and all that stuff, you start to drift away. Well, what can we hold on to? What can we be for sure about? What's the one thing that we can have the expectation about? Verse 19, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, which enters the presence behind the veil, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, having become the high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. The point that he is trying to make is one thing that you can expect is that God is going to keep his promises. And look to what great lengths that we know that he will keep his promises, is that even after Jesus died, he went through the veil, and the veil has double meanings there. Not only think about the high priest going through the veil as far as the temple is concerned, but also the veil being the veil of suffering, the veil of humanity. He went through that to death, and then still goes and does the thing to bring about the promises. Okay? That's what you can expect. You can expect that if I give you a promise, me, David, that I may not keep it because I am not God. But you can expect that if God promises salvation, then it is as sure as done. You can expect that if God promises that I will be there for you, even when you're going through all the other things and every other problem is happening, that He will be there for you. You can expect that. We have lots of other unrealized expectations, but we can always expect that God is there for us, that God hears us, and that God will do what is best for us. God will not always do what is best for what I think is best, but He'll always do what is best for us as far as in the end is concerned. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we do thank you so very much for all of your many blessings. We thank you for just the opportunity to come together and study your word and to realize how amazing you are, and help us to have the right expectations about others, about ourselves, about Christianity, about you, and help us to realize that we can expect you to be who you are, a God that loves, a God that is holy, a God that is reasonable, a God that is logical, a God that is emotional, a God that is everything that we need and everything that we could possibly want. And definitely that you are a God that has sent your Son to die for us, that we might have the remission of sins. And we can know that, we can expect that, because that is the promise that you have given us and that you have shown us through your word. Father, we ask that you just be with us as we go into this time of worship, be with our songs and our prayers and our time together, and help all these things to be impactful upon us, that we may have walked in here one way, but help us all to walk out of here a different way, following closely after your word and your Son, Jesus. It's in His name that we pray. Amen.